We heard loud and clear that there was an enthusiasm gap and that the vast majority of them wanted to see a woman of color on the ticket, and that the conversations and the engagement in the middle of a pandemic with voter suppression alive and well in those states, and the fact that we have an economic crisis where actually people are not able to afford their rent as of this month, all of those calamities, we're basically going to have to crawl through glass to be able to vote and get our votes counted. And having a woman of color on the ticket was part of that, but it wasn't the only thing. You know, the world doesn't rise and the sun doesn't rise and set on one candidate. Much of the excitement right now and how we translate the movement that we've been seeing, calling for Black Lives Matter and justice, and a lot of the changes in policing that we've been in conversation with, are local issues. And what I'm hearing from battleground state folks is it isn't just the top of the ticket, it's also down ballot races. There are 3 women who are Democratic nominees for Senate. There's an historic number of women of color running for Congress, but it's those local, the state legislative, city council races where the call to defund police will be translated into policy and budgets. That's where the fight is. And so it's not an either or, it's that we continue to push. My final point is, you know, Kamala Harris is not the same person as she was in 2011. She has a very progressive voting record as a senator. It's 2020. She showed up in this historic pandemic time as an advocate for economic justice and for racial justice in the ways that are very promising. The movement has strength, and this is an indication of its influence.
And Briahna Gray, what about this issue? One, that Kamala Harris has evolved as a political leader. The issue of the down ballot impact of this choice, and also the senator that you worked for, Senator Bernie Sanders. His advisor Chuck Rocha responded to Biden's pick by saying, "quote, she's a good pick, a safe pick." Your response to that?
I think that it's, I would agree with the fact that it's a safe pick, but I'm a little confused by the argument that this is the pick that's going to turn out Black women in particular for 2 reasons. One, because the reason that Black women are characterized as the base is because of our commitment to voting for the Democratic ticket, kind of regardless of who is on it. And that is, of course, a blessing and a curse. It is a blessing for the Democratic Party because there are all of these instances historically in which Black women have been the but-for factor to Democratic candidates being able to pull through against oftentimes truly heinous Republican alternatives. At the same time, it means that very little has to be done to appeal to Black voters. And we've seen a kind of indifference demonstrated by the Democratic Party that is increasing over the years. So I want to just note that, because I think it's important to say that there is a constituency that isn't as enthusiastic about Joe Biden's ticket right now, and that is younger voters, including younger Black voters, who are in a place where they're a little bit past representation being a be-all, end-all. And I'm, of course, not arguing that that's what Ms. Allison is saying here, but it is difficult to feel sometimes as a person of color, as a Black person in particular, that representational value is being elevated in these instances over your substantive political concerns. So my feeling here is that, yes, Kamala Harris has evolved, but that's also part of the concern here, that I think a lot of voters aren't exactly sure where she stands on a lot of these issues. And I think that's part of what was an issue for her during the primary. Remember that she dropped out before any ballots were cast before the California primary, speculation being that that was in part because she was losing her home state to Andrew Yang. So there is a lot of California-based local domestic concern about her from people who know her record the best. And there has been an implication online, at the very least, that the people who have raised concerns about Kamala Harris and her record are not the base, are not Black people, are white leftists. The Bernie bro mythology has been raised as a specter again, when the reality is there's a lot of grassroots frustration with the fact that this, again, unprecedented political movement is basically being ignored, or at very least a nose is being thumbed at what's going on in the streets right now.
The issue, though, with "We've got your back" is bigger than party. It's bigger than Trump. It's that this country, although the base of the Democratic Party in recent polls has demonstrated that they want a Black woman in leadership, and so now we have a Black woman at the top of the ticket, a woman of color at the top of the ticket. Despite that, racist and sexist comments dismissing the readiness of many of the women of color, particularly Black women who are being vetted for VP, already had started, and it wasn't just from Republicans. It also came from quarters like former Senator Chris Dodd. So what we have to do is be vigilant. We learned a lot from the attacks on Hillary Clinton as a white woman running for president. We know that the racist and sexist attacks are going to continue fast and furious against Senator Harris and other women who are standing for leadership. So what we ask for the media is to focus on the issues, is to not tolerate headlines like they had in LA Times, which is likening Kamala Harris to receiving a rose and on the island and silly things like that. I don't want any conversation about her hair or her clothes. What are the issues? What are we trying to do with this country? What are the essential values of the political game? What is the plan? And when we take the conversation, particularly for women of color, away from characterizing, the personal attributes and dismissing women of color with words like ambitious and, holding women of color to a different standard, we actually get a better political result. So in all, what we're doing as women of color and broadly is we're leading a larger movement to create political space for women of color to lead, not just Senator Harris, but women of color everywhere. We are the fastest growing voting bloc. We are the most underrepresented at every level of government. And for us to be able to assert ourselves in a multiracial democracy, we have to push back hard against racism and sexist attacks and celebrate and uplift our ability and willingness to govern.
I want to echo what Ms. Allison has said about there being no excuse for using racism or sexism to criticize Kamala Harris or any other female candidates or candidates of color. At the same time, evoking the example of Hillary Clinton, I think part of the issue there was that there was a mixed bag of substantive complaints and sexist concerns. And I would hate for us to fall in the same trap that the party fell into in 2016 and dismissing both in tandem, instead of taking and addressing a lot of those substantive concerns head on in a way that it could have helped Hillary Clinton assuage the concerns of her critics and unify a party that much of which felt ultimately gaslit and ignored. And I don't think anybody here thinks that the substantive criminal justice concerns in particular that have been lobbied at Kamala Harris are sexist. And already we've seen some of that characterized that way. So Amy Allison raised this idea of calling her ambitious as a sexist slur. No doubt that some people are characterizing that way, but there's also a very legitimate criticism of her choice to pursue a career as a prosecutor, in part because it's a very commonly known way to advance oneself politically when you have a background as a lawyer. And I say that as an attorney myself. With respect to the Democratic National Convention, I think the party is sending a very clear signal about whose votes they are reaching for and whose they aren't. They have John Kasich, who is a Republican and who has attempted to pass some of the most draconian anti-abortion laws in the state of Ohio in a prime spot when there was news for a while that suggested that they weren't even going to allow AOC to speak. Of course, they now have, but they have made gestures like barring the Young Turks, one of the preeminent lefty news organizations, from having a press pass to a digital event. Why you would do that other than to send a kind of signal to progressives that you're not interested in their vote, I don't know. So it's a really curious choice. It feels, again, like it's 2016, and there is a dynamic being set up where there is a kind of wanton disregard for the values and interests of what is coming up to be the new base, the insurgent left wing of the party, the part of the party that just celebrated the victory of Cori Bush last week, and Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones. And it is telling that the only people under the age of 50 who are speaking at this event are AOC and Pete Buttigieg.